This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute, committed to providing essential legal resources to the law school community. For more information, visit pli.edu/law school.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anastasia Boyko, and I am the host of PLI's How to Navigate Law School podcast. How to Navigate Law School is your podcast guide to unlocking the hidden knowledge and practical skills needed to succeed in law school. We connect students with valuable insights from experienced professionals, decompress law school's unwritten rules, and create a supportive community empowering students to confidently create their future. Hello, and welcome to PLI's How to Navigate Law School podcast. I am your host, Anastasia Boyko, and today I am joined by my friend Sateesh Nori. Sateesh and I met about a year ago, I think, when I was the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Utah, S.J. Quinney College of Law, and I was thinking about innovation, justice tech, access to justice issues, especially as someone who had come from a background of more private sector technology. And so Sateesh and I sat down in New York and started chatting. We're so glad to have you here. Sateesh, tell us your background.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I'm a legal services lawyer. That's how I would define myself. I've been working in legal aid and legal services in New York City for 20 plus years. And I became a lawyer to try to help people, but also to go to court, to do the things that I imagined lawyers did when I was a kid. I watched TV, I read To Kill a Mockingbird. My parents made me watch the movie Gandhi. Gandhi was a lawyer, apparently. And I thought that would be pretty interesting. That'd be a neat job to have. But after 20 years, I realized I'm not really accomplishing a heck of a lot with the way that things work. And that's what brought me to legal technology. How do we leverage the power that we have to really reach all the people who need help with their legal problems? And so in the last 2 years or so, I've been kind of fully immersed in that space, gotten to meet people like you and so many others who've welcomed me with the goal of doing more with what we have and really reaching out and grasping the technology tools that are now available, things that are incredible, like unbelievable things that 5 or 10 years ago we couldn't have dreamed of. We now have, and they're cheap. And so I think we should be using them. So I'm really excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, and so much of what we do as lawyers is know-how and information sharing. And we'll get into this a little bit more later. But I'd love to talk about the access to justice crisis. I was surprised at how many law students aren't familiar with just how grave the statistics are. I think the last time I heard it was 92% of individuals are not getting their legal needs met, which is a pretty stark number. But I'd love for you sort of to paint the picture of what legal services needs look like and how they are and are not being met currently.
Yeah, that 92% number is so striking, and it's up from 88% in the last survey. In my career, I probably represented 1,000 people over 20 years, but I probably turned away 10,000 people. And that really doesn't sit right with me. Why do we have to turn away so many people? What's wrong with the system? Why don't we have enough capacity? Why don't the courts allow people to represent themselves more effectively? Why don't we have information available to people so that they can take action before there's a legal crisis? There's a thing about the way that the law works. And there's this old joke that I heard, which is, how many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb? Answer, how many can you afford? And unfortunately, that model, the billable hour, and the way that we've developed these bespoke legal services, these one-to-one custom services, make legal services unaffordable to most people, not just the 92% of low-income people's problems, but how many people in the middle class can afford a lawyer? A friend of mine says, even while working in big law in New York, he couldn't afford to hire himself. And that's a real problem. And so the idea that we've got to do more is a clear one. We aren't reaching most people, and most lawyers are just working in a tiny corner of the room. They're not looking at the wide kind of array of problems that the average person faces. And those problems are actually pretty interesting. They're pretty meaningful. They're pretty relevant to the way that our society works. That's what our democracy is about. People having a right to assert a claim or to fight for a right that they have. And if they can't do it, then what good is that right? What do people really believe in anymore? And I think we see that playing out right now in our politics nationally.
Yeah, and I'll also add, I think everyone deserves to know how the system works. And the law is complicated. As we go to law school, we understand all the additional layers that we didn't realize before we got to law school. And one thing I find so odd is that specialization is another hurdle on top of the billable pressures. And in the sense that, many of us will in our first semester go back home for the holidays, and folks will ask us generic common legal questions. And our response is, well, I don't know that, right? I haven't studied it. I can't advise you. It's, I have a professional responsibility to not advise you on something I don't know. And my question to myself is always, well, why aren't we teaching students street law? Why aren't we teaching students about the fundamentals of the kinds of things that are going on in news stories, right? If we are trained as helpers, why aren't we being trained in some of the basics of how to help people navigate a really complex system? And so I'd love for you to share some examples that you saw. You did landlord tenant work in New York City. Tell us about some of those hurdles, those very practical hurdles that people face when it comes to accessing information.
People face very simple things that they can't find solutions to, like they don't have heat and it's cold, and they have young kids, or they have an elderly family member. And not having heat means people are going to get sick. They're not going to be able to sleep at night. They're not going to be able to study. Any pre-existing health conditions get worse. And to address a problem like that, it's really complicated for the average person. They don't know where to go. First of all, they don't know if it's a legal problem or a maintenance problem. They don't know how to categorize the problem in order to seek a solution to that problem. And this is something that we face over and over again in cities all across the country, is people aren't able to get their basic needs met. Things that should be human rights, like the right to live in a safe home, the right to have a working elevator, if you live in a building with an elevator, the right to have your trash disposed of, the right to have hot water, and let alone the right to have health care and an education. All these things are built upon that. But if your home is unlivable, the stress that puts on you and the inability that you'll have to deal with everyday problems of other kinds is significant. And so I've seen over my career that really simple things have no easy solutions for people. And that's where, lawyers have failed them. There is an article I was reading by Roscoe Pound recently, who was the dean of Harvard Law School like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And he asked a simple question: is the law a trade or a profession? And a trade is something that people do to benefit themselves. And a profession is something they do to benefit others. And I think the law has become a trade. It's clearly for self-interest. It's clearly for people to protect their livelihood, to make as much money as possible. And they're not thinking about their neighbors, about their communities, about their civic society, about their democracy. And we've really lost the thread on what the law is and what we should be teaching law students. Another problem in law school is that we teach these edge cases, and we focus on those because they're more intellectually interesting or more fun to debate in a big lecture hall, or they allow a really smart professor to show how smart they are. But these edge cases don't come up in everyday life. No one's really practicing con law. in the real world, right? It's just a handful of people who get to do that. In another sense, we're training people to be law professors, right? We're not training people to be lawyers. And that's a huge problem. And that's why we see this huge access to justice gap play out. And that's why it's getting worse.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned so many different threads there. I'd love for you to talk about, what challenges you saw. You've worked with law students in this context. What challenges did you see in them trying to be helpers, right? Trying to help remedy this access to justice gap. What fundamentally, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things, but what fundamentally is a challenge in the structure of law school, right? That directs people in different paths. We know that debt is a big piece of it. We know the pedagogical model is a big piece of it. Many schools have started adding clinics for direct legal aid to individuals. But what other challenges do you see in the law school education model as we try to address access to justice?
Yeah, I think one of the big problems is that since law school in the United States is 3 years, that costs a lot more. And so people have to make decisions about what kind of work they're going to do after law school. The other thing that happens is, even in law schools where clinics are offered, students still have to do their other coursework. And those other courses often count towards their grades and their future career prospects. So how much can even the most dedicated student do for a low-income client or in a clinic setting when they have all these other pressures? They can't fully focus on the work, even if they want to, right? Because they'll be sacrificing their grades, their time, their effort in the other things that maybe on paper matter more because they directly result in paid employment after law school. The other thing that kind of burns me personally is I was an adjunct professor at a law school for a long time. And there is this kind of feeling that law schools don't value clinical education. They value doctrinal education. They value con law and contracts and torts and the doctrinal subjects, the lectern classes, as I heard someone say, versus the table classes where you're sitting around a table and teaching. And that's really flawed, I think. It's backwards. It's literally backwards. And we should be focusing on the skills that the average person graduating from law school is going to need. Interviewing a client, standing up in court, negotiating with somebody, speaking with somebody about a problem and counseling them through it, being a good citizen. These kinds of skills are just kind of second-tier skills in most law schools. And the actual skills that they're learning, it's unclear how they can apply those skills other than in very specific kind of big law or corporate contexts, which, as we've seen lately, maybe AI is going to take over anyway. So it leaves law schools and law students with a lot of risk. What are they going to be working on? What are they being trained for in the next 2 to 3 years when they graduate? What kind of work are they going to expect to do? And how much will they be paid for that work? It's a real black box. And I think it's clear that we're not going to have the same kind of legal jobs that we have now. So the entire model is in jeopardy.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I oftentimes say that law school is really good at teaching you how to be good at law school. And so it is not necessarily a transferable skill set in the way that we have thought it to be. And you definitely underscore that as you mentioned, the theory practice divide, the way that the tenure track is formed, the way that law professors are hired for scholarship instead of practice or mentorship. It creates friction in the model. And I agree with you. If I'm also, many employers oftentimes will look at somebody's grades in admin law versus their clinical experience, whereas the latter might actually have a lot more to bear on their success as a lawyer, right? Their ability to work with clients and deal with real problems versus, did you do well at taking an exam? And how then do you translate that to actually helping direct clients? So I think there's a lot of attention and energy focused potentially on things that don't translate. And we see it perennially, right? Every single law firm survey says they're not ready, right? They come in and we have to retrain them. They don't have the skills that they need. And more, they don't have enough critical thinking skills. And now there's this huge pushback where firms don't want to hire junior lawyers. And so it creates a very strange vortex of talent and talent development, and who is responsible for developing future lawyer leaders and getting them those very practical skills of advocacy, problem solving, client management, et cetera, right? So I think the gap continues to widen. And as AI sort of fills the gap, we have bigger questions to ask. And I think it pressure tests both the legal education system and definitely the legal services delivery model.
Yeah, absolutely. And even without AI, sometimes I compare like medical school with law school. And imagine a medical school in which the professor of surgery hadn't done a surgery in 30 years. And the medical journal was reviewed, the articles in it were reviewed by second-year medical students who had never practiced medicine. And the education was totally removed from the actual practice of medicine, right? Well, that's law school. That's what we have now. And it makes no sense. You wouldn't want to go to a doctor who's trained by someone who hadn't seen a patient in 30 years, right? Why would you go to a lawyer who attends a school in which their most famous, their best professors haven't even practiced law? It's exactly backwards, as I said earlier.
Yes. And so let's start talking about solutions. I got really, really excited when I saw ChatGPT and I started thinking about access to know-how, because my mindset shifted after leaving practicing big law and going into legal technology, particularly in a company that was trying to translate some of the practical aspects of being a lawyer and educate young lawyers about that know-how that you develop over years. So let's talk about some of the really interesting technology that's making its way in lawyer training, but also access to justice.
Yeah, the thing that kind of was my lightning bolt moment was when I saw the first RAG bot. And a lot of people still don't know what RAG is, but RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And it's a type of AI in which the model is trained on a specific set of information, like a volume or knowledge base that's curated. And therefore, RAG bots deliver very precise results. They need to be trained, of course, but they're much more reliable than a general AI model, which results in hallucinations. And I think lawyers are up at night worrying about hallucinations. Like, oh my gosh, this could happen to me. This could happen to someone in my law firm. What I've been telling people of late is that hallucination isn't a bug, it's a feature. That's how all AI works all the time. Hallucinating is a synonym for generating. And so if we change our perspective on that and become more tolerant of the small level of risk, and also not compare these tools to the perfect lawyer, which is often what we do. A perfect lawyer would never make that mistake. Well, who among us is the perfect lawyer, right? We all get tired. We need breaks. We burn out and so on. AI is pretty darn good compared to most lawyers. And so tools like RAG are one example. Then there are really simple things like document assemble tools that we've already had. And if you combine these tools, you kind of mix and match this buffet of options, you get a really powerful set of tools that I think we should think about using for tasks, not jobs. Jobs are the whole package, what we deliver to a client or the result that we might file in court. But if we break down those jobs into tasks and split up the tasks between AI tools and human workers and assemble them together, that's how we get to these really great results in record time, and thereby having the ability to help more people to do work more efficiently. And so I think changing the mindset, accepting risk, changing our benchmark from 100% perfect, which nobody is, to better than nothing, which is what most people get, And learning how to work and kind of assign the tasks to the tools that are at hand is a skill. It takes a lot of kind of buy-in. It takes a lot of trust, and people have to change the way they work. And lawyers are very stubborn people. Like, that's why we're probably good at being lawyers, is because we are dogged and persistent and analytical. When it comes to changing the way we work, those things get in the way, and we've got to be a little bit more open. And that starts in law school, right? If law schools aren't teaching people, I still hear people say, I go to a law school that bans AI, or I take a class in law school and the professor said no AI. And I think that's really short-sighted, and it's doing a disservice to these law students who are paying a lot of money and going into a lot of debt to be employed in the future and have a livelihood. And if you're not preparing them for that future, it's a scam. And that's unacceptable. We've got to be better than that as a collective.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? I think that over the years, it has felt like lawyers are more interested in keeping the monopoly and keeping control over the guild versus the mission of what lawyers are supposed to do in society, right? We are the keepers. We are the stewards of the rules of society. And it's so interesting. When I think about how lawyers think about AI, I agree with you. I don't think the mindset doesn't solve the problem. And so I think when ChatGPT first came out, they saw it as something that could solve a problem. You ask it to write a brief, or you ask it a legal question and it gives you an answer, instead of thinking, let me think about what I do day to day, and then let me see what this thing does well and what it doesn't do well. And then how do I marry the tasks that I have that it could help me with, which oftentimes might be repeatable, rote, boring, aggregate kind of tasks, to free me up to do the more creative, complex, strategic work that I think many lawyers really want to do, right? Instead of the time-intensive rote pieces. But it is a different way of thinking, to think about, like, now we have data over the years about which models are good at which tasks. And then my question is, how does that fit in to how we learn the law? How do we think about when we start using those tools after we started understanding how to write like a lawyer, how to solve problems like a lawyer? Where does this become an ally, to your point, in task maintenance versus how does it replace me? Like, that's not the question. It's never going to replace lawyers, but it can help us remove some of the tasks that many of us would rather not do, frankly.
Yeah, agreed. Sometimes I hear, we are advocating for lawyers to become robots, or robots to replace lawyers. And my answer to that is, we're already robots. What is so interesting about what lawyers have been doing for the last 30 years? It's misery. And that's why we have a high burnout rate. We have a high rate of alcoholism and depression and substance abuse and divorce, because we're miserable. And so for the first time, I think we can look at these tools as a way to free us. Sam Altman said at one point that AI can actually free you from your screen, right? And put you in the real world, because potentially agents and bots can do the stuff that you hate to do, the repetitive stuff. So we should embrace that as lawyers and say, let's get back into the communities. Let's go to court. Let's meet people face to face. Let's try to tackle real problems. It's much more rewarding, I promise you. And ultimately, it might be rewarding economically as well. Maybe not as much as a big law person makes, but I don't
more
think anybody's
meaningful.
going to be making that.
Yeah, but more meaningful and more impactful, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think it takes a bigger imagination than the one I think we've given ourselves permission to have as a profession. We love precedent. We learn it in law school. We oftentimes use precedent in our mindset and our fixed mindset around how we solve problems, right? Versus, okay, let's look at this big backstop of disputes that are coming through, and who else and how else can we solve it? I moved back home to Utah, and we have a regulatory sandbox because our judiciary took the lead and said, look, there is too much volume for us to be able to resolve these things. Unauthorized practice of law is a friction point So let's have a sandbox where that regulation is not as strict as we figure out better solutions for access to justice, and not just the way that we have tried to solve disputes in the past, right? Can we share information with people? Can we educate them about their rights? Can we help them resolve disputes without necessarily using the legal system in that way? And so I would love to hear about the tools that you built, as well as, some of the exciting technology tools that are out there that are solving real world problems for people.
Yeah, so I built two tools with some friends. One is called Roxanne, and I built that with Joseph Legal, and it helps tenants get answers to questions about repairs. So like not having heat, for example. And that's a solution that doesn't exist in the status quo. There's no way to get help on the details of getting repairs made in New York City. And it's just a rag bot. It's very kind of straightforward technically, but it helps a lot of people. It works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can work in many languages, and we're working on that. And it's a simple solution that can be replicated anywhere that there are tenants and landlords, which is a lot of places. The other one is called Depositron, and it helps tenants. I worked on that with LawDroid, and it helps tenants get their security deposits back from their landlords. This is a problem that I think in New York alone is $100 million problem annually. So $100 million of tenants' hard-earned money is being improperly withheld by landlords because landlords know there's no easy way for the tenants to fight for that money. Well, we created a letter builder that also has a Q&A feature that gives tenants easy information so they can act on it and try to get their money back. I've got a couple other tools in the works too. One is called ClaimZ, and it is a AI-powered small claims arbitration tool. So small claims court in New York is for small dollar disputes. And unfortunately, the courts take about 14 months to resolve those disputes. And that's really too long. It's not justice for anyone, either party, if you have to wait that long to get a result. So imagine an AI-powered arbitration tool that collects the evidence, makes a decision really quickly within 24 hours, and maybe costs $20, so $25 or something like that. And so it's self-sustaining. It supports itself. It has a revenue stream. And we just have to scale it and make it accessible to, if not hundreds of thousands of people who access small claims court every day. And it provides a solution. And it also restores people's faith in the system, right? Something works. I got justice. I got a result. I'm not up at night worrying about this thing that's been hanging over my head for 14 months. And there's plenty more. There are just so many opportunities to build stuff like this. So many people are doing it. I'm really amazed at the creativity that people are expressing. And unfortunately, we have to overcome the lawyers who stand in the way in many cases. They don't want to do it. They're afraid of it. They think it's not perfect, and so on.
Yeah, I think the perfect, it really is the enemy of the good here, in the sense that consumers are going to start using something as quickly as it's good enough, right? WebMD became good enough to help understand complex ailments or some random symptom that is coming up. And I think that many consumers have gotten there with ChatGPT or Google, right? And so I think we have to look at our entire legal system and the kinds of questions that come up. And to your point, I may not use ChatGPT for a complex appellate brief at the Supreme Court, but I may ask it some basic questions about entity formation in the state that I'm in and where I should file and what the benefits are of incorporating in a different state, right? Or what are the rules around custody and divorce in my jurisdiction? So that goes a really long way. And I'd love, as we sort of wrap up, I'd love to ask you, like if a student is interested in these topics, where should they seek resources, right? Is it LSC? Is it a Justice Tech consortium? Where should they go to learn more about this, whether or not their school has resources?
Yeah, I mean, a place that I started is LinkedIn. I just connected with a lot of people like you, and people welcomed me, and I learned so much, and I connected in person as well after meeting people there. And then it opened up a lot of conferences and groups and associations and so on. So I think for law students, just do some research, find out where your local kind of legal tech hub is, or your local tech AI group, and write to them. People write to me all the time, and I'm always happy to chat and point people in the right direction. And the other thing I would say is, like, try this stuff out. You'd be surprised at how much you can accomplish. I'm not a technologist. I say sometimes jokingly, I don't even know how the internet works. I couldn't explain it to you if I was under pressure. And yet I've built a couple of things because they're really simple to do. You just need a good idea and a purpose. And a lot of this stuff kind of builds itself. And so just be bold and go out there and try it out. And you'll also be preparing yourself for a future career if your law school isn't giving that opportunity to you.
Yeah, and I'll also add for students, the cool thing about AI is that it actually also helps you figure out how AI works, right? So if you're trying to build something, you can actually ask it, how would I go about building an app, right? What is vibe coding? Yeah. What are the most pressing challenges in access to justice in my jurisdiction, in this population, in this area? So use it as a friend in that way. And there's one question that we ask everybody as the last question for guests. And I didn't prepare you for it, but it's, what advice do you have for your former law school self?
Yeah, I mean, I think be more bold and try out more things. I spent 20 years kind of doing the same old thing, which was invaluable. And I got to work with a lot of great people. And AI hadn't come around yet, but I would say, like, be bold, try out different paths. I think law students tend to think this is what my path is, like as early as 1L or even before they go to law school. You have no idea what's to come. And nothing is more true of that than right now, right? Like, who could have said 3 years ago that we would be talking at all right now, you and I, about this topic? And 3 years from now, there's no telling. I have a bet with my 13-year-old son about whether he'll ever have to drive a car or whether cars will be all self-driving. And I think that's a pretty good bet I would make, that in 3 years, there will be no more human drivers of automobiles.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things about you is you really embody this idea of being a yes. Right? Like, you're always thinking and tinkering and building new tools and connecting with everybody and trying to find crossover. And I think it is so admirable and it's so inspiring. And it's why I really consider you one of my favorite people and one of my friends, because we need more of it, right? Like, it is contagious when someone's just like, sure, I don't know, but let's figure it out, versus the traditional, way in our system, which is, no, we don't do that, right? No, we can't do that. And this is why. So I really am so grateful that you joined us and you continue to inspire us. If you're listening to this, please follow Sateesh on LinkedIn. It will warm your heart as he shares all the different ways that he's trying to make a difference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sateesh.
Thanks for listening to How to Navigate Law School, the podcast dedicated to guiding you through the hidden rules and practical skills essential for success in law school. For additional resources, visit PLI's Law School Hub at pli.edu/law school. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast represent those of the individuals being interviewed and not necessarily those of PLI. PLI is a nonprofit learning organization dedicated to keeping attorneys and other professionals at the forefront of knowledge and expertise.